Greetings, Taku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Arrow episode review right here on Otaku Assemble Weekly. And as always, I bring you the latest in this week's Arrow episode review. And this is my review of Season 4, Episode 19, entitled Canary Cried. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode. I'm actually highly conflicted about this week's episode. I have a lot of mixed thoughts about it, and that's because I can no longer view this series in the same lens. The problem is, and I'm just going to go ahead and address the elephant in the room right here and now. Okay, so for those of you all who have seen my previous Arrow episode review, you all will remember that I ended that review saying that I was not sold on Laurel's death. The way that they handled it and the way it was presented in the episode, I was not convinced that she was permanently written off of the show. However, in the weeks that followed, in the break that Arrow just came back from, I have read and heard many things that suggest that the writers are adamant about writing Laurel off permanently, that she will not be returning to the series. For the sake of my reviews, I have to assume, I have to go with the notion that Laurel is gone. I have to. Because if I was still holding out for the idea that she could come back at a later point in time, even if that was the case, that does not affect, or rather it should not affect, the show in its immediacy, the show as it stands right now. So with that being said, I have to look at the show differently. I have to look at the show differently. I have to look at it the way they are presenting it to us as it stands. And if that's the case, then I am highly disappointed in the series. I think that killing off Laurel is a huge mistake. I think that they've never done her character justice, and the fact that they would kill her off in this manner, I view this as a huge squandered opportunity, a huge misstep, a huge squandered opportunity. And it changes things. It does changes things. It changes the landscape of the show. It changes the dynamic of the series, because Black Canary is a staple character in the franchise. She is a major character in the Green Arrow mythology, and just for me personally, she is not only one of my favorite Green Arrow franchise characters, but she's one of my favorite DC heroines, period. So the fact that now this series does have that void, oh, and let's not forget, she also was the female lead of this series. So now that void is there, and knowing that, I do feel like the series has not appropriately addressed the void that should be created by her absence. And this is what I mean. So in this week's episode, we're dealing with two main things, right? We're dealing with the immediate aftermath of Laurel's death, and we're also dealing with someone impersonating the Black Canary. So, and both of these things, I'll share my thoughts on both of these separately later on in the review. But first, I want to touch upon the aftermath of Laurel's death, because here's the thing. There are pros and cons to the way in which it's been presented. Okay, so what's the pro? Because it seems like they decided to go ahead and have all the characters grieve in this episode, get that out of the way so that we can move on to the next thing, okay? What's the pro in that? The pro is that we get it out of the way, and so, you know, now we don't really have to linger on it. Okay, that's fine and dandy. However, if that's what the writers were intending for, and if that's what they wanted for the series, then I do think one misstep they had with it is that, with the exception of Oliver, no individual character really set the groundwork for some proactive action by the end of the episode. So this is what I mean. Okay, so in this episode, we pretty much have Team Arrow. Not only are they grieving, but they're all blaming themselves for Laurel's death, which I thought was kind of odd, because the whole blaming yourself for everything, they do mention it quite a few times in the episode. That's Oliver's thing. That's Oliver's thing. So the fact that Oliver wasn't doing that this episode, that I actually was surprised by, and that I actually appreciated, because it does show a bit of character growth. The fact that Oliver doesn't immediately go back to that place of blaming himself for Laurel's death. And I will say this, the flashbacks where we were dealing with the aftermath of Tommy's death, number one, I thought most of that was bullshit, because it seemed to be more like, oh, no, we're showing you this not to draw a parallel between the aftermath of Tommy's death and the aftermath of Laurel's death. We're showing you these flashbacks because we want to show you this moment in time in which Oliver and Laurel bonded. Here's the thing, though. What's fucked up about that is, in doing so, you make that less about Tommy and more about them. More specifically, you make that less about Tommy and more about Oliver. More about what he's feeling, what he's thinking. That's pretty damn selfish. Now, here's the thing, though. It is effective if you look at it from the standpoint that that's how Oliver dealt with grief then, and this is how he's dealing with it now. Okay, I get that. Good job. Good work with that part. But, okay, Diggle and Felicity, them blaming themselves for what happened to Laurel, that I thought was a tad bit out of character for them, especially with Diggle. Especially with Diggle, because Diggle, I think, is one of the more proactive characters on the show. So the fact that Diggle didn't immediately snap out of it and was like, okay, you know what? Oliver says this wasn't my fault. Felicity's now repeated the same thing, because they did almost literally repeat the exact same thing. I gotta find Andy. We know, based off the preview for next week's episode, we'll be dealing with that next week, but we didn't get the ball rolling on the hunt for Andy by the end of this episode. So once again, if they were going for the whole grief wrap up in one episode bit, then we really should have gotten something by the end of the episode where we see how Diggle's going to respond to it. Now, okay, I've grieved, I'm over it, now let's move on. We didn't get that with Diggle. The same thing with Felicity, and Felicity is probably the biggest one, because if any character was going to blame themselves for what happened to Laurel, Felicity would be the one I would expect, and Felicity would be the one I think should probably, if you want to talk about guilt, if you want to talk about being arrested by guilt, Felicity is the one that would make the most sense to me, because let's face it, she wasn't there. She wasn't there. She let her personal feelings and her personal bullshit, completely get in the way of what it was she was supposed to be doing with that team. She completely allowed it to blind her to the bigger picture. And what happened? One of her teammates died because she could not get over her own mixed up bullshit. One of her teammates died. She is the one, I think, rightfully should blame herself. Not because she was directly responsible, but because she did not do anything to help prevent something like that from happening, right? But we got that I think we only got that in like 2 exchanges with Felicity, and then by the end of the episode, she's like, oh, you need to kill Damien Dark. Well, Felicity, what are you doing? What are you doing to help Oliver accomplish that? We didn't get any sign of that. And that's not to say that Felicity, because apparently now she is back on the team, that's not to say that Felicity won't play a much larger role in bringing down Damien Dark later on in the season. What I'm saying is, we did not get any segue into that. You know what I mean? The thing with Quentin, now see, that I thought that was probably the best in terms of like how the characters were dealing with Laurel's death. I think that one was the best done, because it's fully consistent with his character, and it does display some character growth. Because what happened? Quentin did not completely shut down, and he didn't dive into a bottle of alcohol. No, he was the one character that was somewhat proactive, because he even sought out Nisa and was like, yo, let's go ahead and get this Lazarus Pit thing going. Now, granted, of course, we know that the Lazarus Pit was destroyed. Quentin didn't know that. But at least he tried. He was trying to find a way. And he's the one that even points out, with all of the stuff they've seen in this series, right? And with how many characters have come back from the dead at this point, he's the one that's like, let's find something to bring her back. That I thought completely made sense. And it did show some sort of character growth with Quinn. That I thought was good, right? Okay, so taking all of everything that I just said into consideration, the pros and cons of trying to get this all done in one episode, right? Okay, some pros I just mentioned. But there's a major con that has to be addressed with this whole thing. The major con is the fact that I think, and I'm getting the feeling, that by trying to do all of this in one episode, you sort of diminish the magnitude of Laurel's death. By choosing to do it all in one episode, instead of what I would have recommended is small little snippets throughout the rest of the season, by sort of shoehorning everything into one episode, you really make it feel like Laurel's death, okay, we'll just address it in one episode and then we'll completely move on. Now, that's not to say that that's what will necessarily happen, but that's sort of the feel I'm getting. And once again, I can't help but think that it does sort of undermine Laurel's character. It does sort of demean her, because from what I've read, she's not a fan favorite, and she certainly wasn't favored by the writers. I'm starting to see some of that, because let's face it, they spent more time on the aftermath of Sarah's death last season than with Laurel so far. That's kind of messed up. That's kind of messed up. And I would have much rather preferred them, like I said, instead of shoehorning everything in one episode, stretch it out little by little throughout the rest of the season. This should have been the thing that snapped Felicity out of her bullshit. Now, it appears to be that way, but I didn't get that Felicity actually came around. You know what I'm saying? Because I don't think we spent enough time with her. We certainly didn't spend enough time in her head to get that. If done correctly and written correctly, you could have really made it more of a positive thing for Felicity to finally sort of get to wake up and sort of get that realization, and instead of it being this whole guilt trip. Now, yes, guilt could have been the triggering factor, the thing that made her start thinking like that in the first place, but for her to be wound up in it, I didn't buy it. And so yeah, I think once again, I know I kind of went off on a tangent. I know I kind of went off on a rant in this review with that, but that's such a glaring problem that the series has now, that I think it created for itself, and I can't ignore it. I can't ignore it. Finally, I'm going to touch briefly on the conflict for this episode. Okay, the whole someone impersonating the Black Canary, not a bad idea, but I think it was way too soon. I mean, it's the episode right after Laurel dies. I think that was way too soon. And the fact that the person responsible was one of the hostages that Dark had in that warehouse, one of the people that he was, killing, that he had captured and was holding prisoner or whatnot. The fact that it was one of those people, and it didn't result in anything. It didn't result in them finding out some type of information that might have helped them find Dark, or some type of information about the way in which they operate. We didn't get anything to where, the young woman was like, oh, there are other people like me, and we would support you in your endeavor to take down Dark, because her whole motive was revenge. That's why she went after Dark's wife. The whole thing was revenge. So we didn't really get anything from that character that contributed to Oliver and Team Arrow's efforts. There wasn't any type of collaboration between the two, so at that point, it really did just sort of feel like filler. And once again, I think that's a huge missed opportunity, because that could have been the one angle, the one in that Oliver and his team, the sort of silver lining, if you will, given the tragedy they're experiencing, that could have been the one thing that, okay, now we sort of have some insider information, or we have a person who could help us against Dark in some form or fashion, so now we know how to move on from here. And we didn't get that. So, like I said, this episode, I'm highly conflicted about it because of the overbearing issue that this series now faces. And given what we got in the episode, there were only a few things I think actually worked well. The rest of them just seemed to sort of present more problems. And I really don't know what all to think of it. Like I said, I mean, it's very surprising because this season, compared to season 3, I think season 4 is much better. And I thought, I really enjoyed, the first half of season 4. I loved it. I loved this show again. But now that we've gotten to this point, I'll be honest with you all, I'm struggling with it. I'm trying to figure out what went wrong. I mean, the only way to really be able to gauge is to just finish out the season and see where it all leads. But as it stands right now, man, I mean, this show is suffering. It's suffering from some serious creative issues, some writing issues, some narrative issues, and some really questionable creative decisions. So we'll just have to wait and see how this whole thing results in. And I'll be honest with you guys, given the status quo of the series now, I have no idea what to expect from next season. I have no clue whatsoever. So that's going to go ahead and wrap up this week's Arrow episode review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. In the comments below, leave your thoughts both on this week's episode. Leave your thoughts on next week's episode. Leave your thoughts on anything I brought up in this review, because I want to know what you all are thinking about this as well. If you like this video, please feel free to thumb it up, share it with other fans of the show, people you think might enjoy my reviews, and if you have yet to do so, subscribe to the OAW YouTube channel. Annotation is above head. Join me tomorrow for my Legends of Tomorrow episode review. Friday, the latest discussion of the week will be out. Saturday, top 5, and then wrapping everything up on Sunday, my latest Hunter x Hunter episode review. And with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.